Imagine replacing your mailbox again and again only to see it smashed every time by the same patrol cars. One rancher finally decided enough was enough and built a box so tough it turned a neighborhood nuisance into a courtroom battle. The sound came first, a sharp, hollow crack that echoed across the open Texas land like a gunshot. Curtis Delaney didn't need to look up from the workbench in his barn to know what it was. He'd heard that sound too many times before, the sickening crunch of his mailbox colliding with another bumper. He dropped his wrench, stepped outside, and there it was. His brand new mailbox, barely 2 weeks old, folded in half at the edge of his driveway on FM 89 just outside Abilene. The metal post bent like a crooked arm, the door hanging open like a broken jaw. A white SUV from the HOA patrol slowed for a moment, then kept driving as if nothing had happened. Curtis rubbed his temples. 52 years old, he'd worked hard to build a modest life here. A few fenced pastures, a farmhouse, a shop where he welded and fixed equipment. It wasn't much by Texas standards, but it was his pride. Lately, though, no matter how much sweat he poured into the place, someone seemed determined to shatter his peace. 4 mailboxes had already been destroyed in 6 months. Each one cost money, each one stole his time, and every single one ended up flattened under the tires of those so-called neighborhood cops. He muttered under his breath, "That's it. I'm done." He crossed the dusty yard toward the road, just as his neighbor Janice Hollowbrook appeared with her dog. She shook her head at the wreck. "Again?" she asked. "5th time," Curtis said bitterly. Janice frowned, pulling her hat lower against the sun. "They must be doing it on purpose. Nobody hits the same box that many times unless they're blind." Curtis exhaled, jaw tight. Blind, or they just don't care. It wasn't just the mailbox. It was the way he was brushed off at HOA meetings, the looks from certain neighbors, as if he was the problem. The first time it happened, he told himself it was bad luck. By the third, he was certain there was more to it. At dinner, his wife Renee suggested moving the mailbox closer to the house. Curtis shook his head. "That's not the point. They'll find a way to mess with it no matter where it is, and I'll be damned if I let them push me around." His teenage son Caleb leaned in, asking if he thought they were targeting him. Curtis paused. Whether deliberate or careless didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they didn't respect him, and he was tired of paying for it. The next morning, tape measure in hand, he stood staring at the twisted remains while cars slowed to gawk. He could almost hear the whispers. Why doesn't he just drop it? Curtis never lets anything go. But giving up wasn't in his blood. Raised in Wichita Falls, the son of a steelworker, hardened in the oil fields before buying his ranch, he knew what it meant to fight for what you owned. And under the scorching Texas sun, sweat rolling down his neck, he made a decision that would have the whole neighborhood talking. He wasn't going to play nice anymore. He didn't realize yet that his choice would spark a battle that pulled the entire community into its crossfire. The pattern was undeniable. The first mailbox went down late February on a chilly Friday evening. He'd been feeding cattle when he heard the thud and saw the patrol vehicle drive away. The post split like kindling. He replaced it the next morning, telling himself everyone makes mistakes on narrow roads. But 2 weeks later, another SUV clipped it, leaving it bent in half again. He stood in disbelief. By the third time, disbelief turned to anger. He called the HOA office, but a receptionist brushed him off. At the next meeting, Chairman Gregory Winslow smirked, saying, "Mailboxes get hit all the time." Curtis clenched, his jaw. "5 in less than half a year, you think that's normal?" Winslow shrugged. "Maybe move it back a few feet." The meeting moved on like nothing had happened. That dismissal stung worse than the wreck itself. At the grocery store later, an older neighbor, Sherman Hayes, lowered his voice and said, "I've seen it. You sure they're not doing it to mess with you? Folks don't forget you fought Winslow about that fence rule last year." That thought stuck with Curtis. Was it retaliation? Because none of his neighbors' boxes were touched. Some stood, crooked and rusted but untouched. Only his kept getting flattened. By the 5th one, he no longer saw random accidents. He saw a message. "You can't win." Nights on the porch with Renee, he muttered, They think I'll give up. They think I'll stop. Renee would ask softly, "And will you?" He always shook his head. Not a chance. He sketched in the barn at night. Steel beams, bolts, concrete bases. If they wanted to keep hitting his mailbox, fine. This time the mailbox would hit back. But before that plan came to life, one more HOA meeting would ignite his fury. The community center smelled of old carpet and burnt coffee. Curtis sat in the back, arms folded, no mood for chit-chat. At the front, under buzzing fluorescent lights, sat the board. In the middle was Gregory Winslow, silver hair slicked back, sport coat stretched across his shoulders like he ran a corporation instead of a neighborhood association. Gregory tapped the microphone, going through routine updates before opening the floor. Curtis stood. "Yeah, I've got something." Heads turned. Gregory's smile thinned. "Go ahead, Mr. Delaney." Curtis walked a few steps closer. "That's the 5th mailbox this year. Same story every time, a patrol car runs it over and nothing gets done. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking why the people we pay to protect us keep destroying my property." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gregory leaned into the mic. "Curtis, accidents happen. Those roads..." Curtis cut him off. "Don't say it's the roads. My neighbors' mailboxes have stood for years. Mine gets flattened like clockwork." Pamela Griggs, another board member, tried to suggest placement, but Curtis snapped, "It's not placement, and it's not chance. Either they're careless or they're aiming for it. Either way, I'm the one paying." Gregory leaned back, fingers laced, tone patronizing. "These patrols are volunteers. They keep crime down." Curtis barked back, "Volunteers don't drive SUVs with flashing lights. Volunteers don't cost me 5 mailboxes in 6 months." The room grew tense. Whispers spread. Finally, Gregory said, "We can't reimburse every resident for every accident. The HOA would be broke. Maybe, move your mailbox back, that would solve your problem." The words hung heavy. Solve your problem, as if Curtis was to blame. He took a breath. "That box is on my land. It's not in the road. It's exactly where it belongs. And you all know it." The room went still until Sherman spoke up. "Gregory, he's right. 30 years on this road. I've never seen anything like it. One man's mailbox hit over and over. That ain't normal." Eyes turned to the board. Gregory forced a smile. "We'll make a note of your concern. That's all we can do right now." A note. After months of damage and money wasted, they would write a note. Curtis turned and walked out without another word, boots echoing down the hall. Outside, Sherman caught up. "You gave it to him straight. Don't let him make you the problem. He's protecting them, not you." Curtis nodded at the horizon. "Then I'll protect myself." And he wasn't talking about words anymore. He was picturing steel and concrete, a mailbox that wouldn't bow to anyone. Within a week, rumors spread faster than wildfire. At the feed store at the gas station, people whispered. He went off on Winslow. Curtis always did have a temper. Maybe he should just let it go. It's just a mailbox, not the Alamo. Curtis kept his head down, but the talk stung. It painted him as the troublemaker, not the man being wronged. One Saturday in the barn, sorting tools, his neighbor Edith Rowland walked up. Sharp-tongued, late 60s, never one to miss gossip. "You really gave Greg a mouthful the other night," she said. Curtis didn't look up. "I spoke my piece." Edith smirked. "Well, folks are saying you're picking fights just to stir the pot. That mailbox ain't worth losing friends over." Curtis wiped sweat from his forehead, looked her in the eye, and said quietly, "It's not about the mailbox, it's about respect. If it was your fence, you'd understand." Curtis Delaney had replaced his mailbox 5 times, each one smashed by the HOA patrol like it was sport. When his neighbor Sherman suggested maybe it was revenge for Curtis standing up to the board, Curtis only muttered that he was tired of letting it slide. That evening, his wife Renee told him he wasn't sleeping, and he admitted the thought haunted him. What if Sherman was right? What if Winslow and the board were teaching him a lesson? Renee held his hand and told him he belonged, but the whispers in town only grew. At the hardware store, Curtis overheard men saying he was always looking for a fight. Even his son Caleb asked if he planned to sue, and Curtis only shook his head. Lawsuits cost money they didn't have. Instead, he said he would build something they couldn't break. Caleb half joked about a tank, and Curtis smiled, saying close enough. At night, he pulled on his gloves and welding mask, sparks flying in the shop like a forge. Years on oil rigs had made him handy, but this wasn't repair. It was armor. When Caleb asked what he was building, Curtis said a mailbox they'd never forget. The frame was steel, 3 feet deep in concrete disguised with cedar to look ordinary. Renee worried someone might get hurt, but Curtis told her they'd been hurting him all along, every crash saying his property didn't matter. This time, if they hit it, they'd finally feel what he'd felt. Sherman stopped by and warned the board wouldn't like it. Curtis only said Winslow's opinion didn't put food on his table. By June, he had dug the trench, poured concrete, and built what looked like a simple rustic box. To neighbors, it blended in, but Curtis knew the truth. When Edith passed by asking if it was new, he said, "Let's hope it lasts." That hope was tested, soon. One Thursday, he heard a heavy thud, not the thin crunch of tin, but steel on steel. Running to the road, he saw a patrol SUV crumpled, bumper sagging, hood steaming, while his mailbox stood untouched. The dazed young driver stumbled out, demanding to know what he'd hit. Curtis only said it was a mailbox. Neighbors gathered. Janice gasped that it didn't even move. Sherman laughed that Curtis had built a fortress, and Edith warned he'd get sued. Curtis shot back that no one worried when his boxes were destroyed. By evening, Winslow himself arrived, scolding Curtis for recklessness. Curtis reminded him that 5 boxes had been destroyed with no help from the board. Neighbors split down the middle, some backing Curtis, others whispering about danger. Renee told the crowd they'd lived here 12 years and Curtis had never caused trouble. He just wanted fairness. Winslow muttered it wasn't over and left, but Curtis stood taller than he had in months. Yet instead of ending the fight, the crash fed the flames. At the diner, people argued if it was a booby trap or just common sense. Online, Gregory posted that the mailbox was unsafe, while others praised Curtis as a hero. That night, Winslow showed up at Curtis's door with Edith, folder in hand, declaring the box a violation. Curtis demanded to see where sturdiness was forbidden. Winslow said it was about uniformity and safety. Edith chimed in that children could be hurt, and Curtis cut her short, saying only trucks hit mailboxes. Winslow gave him 1 week to remove it or face fines and legal action. Curtis leaned against the frame and said, steady as stone, "You go ahead and fine me, because this box isn't coming down." Winslow stormed off, Edith following, while Renee sat across the table later that night, worry in her eyes. The war over a simple mailbox had only begun. Renee's voice was tight with worry. "They're going to come after you, Curtis, you heard him. Fines, maybe even court." Curtis stared into his glass of iced tea. "Let them. I didn't break any laws. That mailbox is on my land. I'm not the one who caused the wreck." Caleb, sitting nearby, piped up, "Dad, people at school think you're some kind of legend. One guy even said you built a tank mailbox." Curtis chuckled softly, but Renee didn't smile. Being a legend doesn't pay the fines. The tension only grew heavier over the next few days. Sherman stopped by again, concern written on his face. "I heard Gregory's pushing the board to sue. He wants to make an example of you." "Good luck to him," Curtis muttered. Sherman shook his head. "You know he's got connections. Lawyers, money. You might win in spirit, but you'll bleed cash fighting him." Curtis exhaled steadily, defiant. "Then I'll bleed, because if I give in now, they'll know they can break me whenever they want." The fallout wasn't just legal, it was social. Half the neighborhood waved at Curtis in solidarity, even clapping him on the back at the gas station. The other half crossed the street when they saw him, whispering about lawsuits and recklessness. Through it all, the mailbox stood, part symbol, part warning, part beacon. The louder the debate grew, the more pressure built, and it wasn't long before the patrol itself struck back. The week after the crash, Curtis noticed something new. The HOA patrol cars didn't just drive by anymore. They lingered, White SUVs with magnetic decals sat at the end of the road, engines idling, lights flickering just long enough to remind him they were there. If Curtis walked to his mailbox, the drivers leaned out their windows and stared. This wasn't protection anymore, it was surveillance. One evening, Curtis was tightening a gate chain when a patrol SUV rolled to a stop. The driver, a stocky man with close-cropped hair, rolled down the window. "You Delaney?" he asked, though it was clear he already knew. Curtis straightened. "That's right." The man smirked. "Heard you got yourself a fancy mailbox. Shame what it does to a truck." Curtis didn't flinch. "Maybe you ought to keep your trucks off it then." The driver chuckled, revved the engine, and rolled. Away. Curtis watched the taillights fade, anger knotting his stomach. The next morning, Renee found a note stuck to the front gate. The handwriting was rough, the message short. "Take it down before someone gets hurt." She brought it inside, hands shaking. "Curtis, this isn't just talk anymore." He read the note twice, then folded it carefully. "Let them try." Caleb slammed his fist on the table. "This is messed up. They're acting like you're the criminal." Curtis forced a calm tone. "That's how people like Winslow work. Turn the story around, make you the problem." At the grocery store later that week, Curtis ran into Edith Rowland. She blocked his way with her cart. "You think this is about a mailbox, Curtis, but you're wrong. You're stirring up division. Folks are scared. They don't want a war between you and the HOA. Curtis kept his voice steady. "Edith, I didn't start this war. I just stopped letting them win it." She shook her head, muttering, "You'll regret this." The next HOA meeting was packed. Gregory Winslow sat at the front like a judge, clearing his throat, his voice booming through the mic. "We've had multiple complaints about a resident who installed an unsafe structure. This mailbox has already caused significant damage to a patrol vehicle, and we've received threats of legal action from our contractors." Curtis stood immediately. "That mailbox is on my land. It's not unsafe, it's strong. If your drivers can't control their vehicles, that's not my fault." The crowd erupted. Some shouted agreement, others hissed back. Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! You are in violation of HOA guidelines. Fines will begin immediately." Curtis glared. "I'm not paying a dime for protecting. What's mine?" Sherman's voice carried from the back. "Gregory, you're crossing a line. That mailbox isn't hurting anyone except careless drivers. You just don't like that Curtis stood up to you." More chaos followed, and Gregory adjourned the meeting in anger. Outside, Sherman muttered, "He's not going to let this go." Curtis nodded. "Neither am I." That night, patrol SUVs returned, headlights fixed on his house for an hour. Renee pulled the curtains tight. "Curtis, this isn't just an argument anymore, this is a fight." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll fight it together." The legal notice came in July, tucked into a plain white envelope in the very mailbox Curtis had built. Renee found it first, trembling. "They're suing you." Curtis read the dense paragraphs: violation of community standards, unsafe obstruction, public hazard. At the bottom, Winslow's signature. Caleb shoved his chair back. "This is garbage." "They're the ones hitting it. How is it your fault?" Curtis folded the letter neatly. "They want a fight in court? Fine. We'll give them one." Sherman stopped by again. "Curtis, lawsuits bleed folks dry. Winslow's counting on you, not having the stomach for it." Curtis shook his head. "If I back down now, I'll prove him right. I'll fight." Sherman sighed. "Then you're gonna need help." Help came in the form of attorney Maxine Porter, a sharp woman with a reputation for dismantling HOAs. Sitting in Curtis's living room, she flipped through the complaint with a faint smirk. "They're reaching. Mailboxes answer to postal law, not HOA egos. You've done nothing illegal. They'll spin it as a hazard, but unless they can prove negligence, a judge won't buy it." Curtis leaned forward. "So we can win?" Maxine shrugged. "We can hold our ground. But Winslow's not bringing this to win. He's bringing it to wear you out. Be ready for the long haul." Renee frowned. "Can we afford this?" Maxine answered calmly. There'll be costs, but half the time they fold before trial. He's banking on intimidation. Curtis nodded. Then let's show him I don't care. Weeks passed in a blur of chores and tension. Some neighbors brought casseroles or notes of support. Others turned away. Gregory himself pulled into the driveway one evening. He rolled his window down. You think this is a game, Curtis? Curtis wiped his hands on a rag. I think you're scared of losing control. Gregory sneered. You're dividing this community. Take it down and it all goes away. Curtis leaned on the fence. Not a chance. Gregory's voice dropped. Then you'll regret it. He drove off, dust curling behind his car. 2 weeks before the hearing, Maxine called. They've dropped it. Too much pushback, too much attention. Winslow couldn't risk losing in front of a judge. Curtis stood in silence, the words sinking in. Dropped. After months of threats, it was over. That evening, the family sat on the porch, watching the sun sink over the fields. Sherman arrived with sweet tea, raising his glass. To standing your ground. Curtis clinked his glass. And to never letting them run you over. The mailbox still stood, cedar and steel, shining in the fading light. To outsiders, it was just a mailbox, but to Curtis, it was a monument, a reminder that one man pushed far enough could hold the line. The true victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in proving that respect is earned when you refuse to be silent. Curtis never planned to become a symbol, but that's what happened. Some people slowed down when they passed his ranch, nodding with respect. Others shook their heads. Either way, they noticed. One evening, Renee asked quietly, Was it worth it? All the stress, the rumors, the lawsuit? Curtis looked at the mailbox standing firm by the road. Yeah, it was worth it, because I didn't back down. Caleb grinned. Kids at school still talk about it. They say my dad built the indestructible mailbox. Curtis shook his head with a smile. It's not about the mailbox. It's about standing your ground. If you let people walk over you once, they'll keep doing it. You've got to draw your line and hold it. Sherman came by later with folding chairs. He settled in, nodding toward the road. Funny thing, Curtis. That mailbox has got folks thinking. Some see defiance, others see common sense. Either way, you made people pay attention. Curtis nodded slowly. Sometimes that's the only way to get respect. You don't ask for it. You show people you mean it. Sherman chuckled. That thing'll still be standing when we're long gone. Curtis stared at the sunset. Maybe that's the lesson. You can't control what people say about you, but you can control how you respond. And sometimes the strongest response is refusing to bend. Life grew calmer after that. The patrols kept their distance. Winslow moved on to barking dogs and lawn disputes. The lawsuits were gone, the whispers fading. Curtis carried the lesson with him. He had stood his ground and hadn't broken. That mattered more than anyone's approval. His story carried a clear message. Standing up for yourself isn't just about property. It's about dignity. Curtis knew his mailbox wouldn't change the world, but maybe it would remind someone else they don't have to accept being pushed around. You can fight back, not with anger, not with violence, but with steady determination. Summer rolled on, cicadas buzzing. Nights spent on the porch in peace. The scars remained, but so did the lesson. It's never about the fight itself. It's about what you carry forward once it's over. If you've been dismissed, ignored, or worn down, remember this. You don't have to let them win. You have the right to draw your line, stand your ground, and build your own kind of indestructible mailbox. Respect isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes it has to be taken back.